What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Late Night Show with Dr. Kojo. I'm late because I was having a coughing attack or spell or something like that. I was trying to eat my rice too fast, and I was looking at the time. I was trying to get on here because we have a very special show. We have a very special guest tonight, and before we get into it, I want to make sure that you all can actually see the stream. So let me see if people can see the stream. Is everybody checking in from Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter? All right, so Madison. All right, looks like people are on. Perfect. Justin, what's up, Justin? All right, we got Buffalo in the house. All right, perfect. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Kojo. I'm checking in from sunny Los Angeles, California. It was raining yesterday, but it's great today. So I'm checking in from LA, and I would love to know where you all are checking in from. Let's get into it. Portland, Oregon. What's up, Nebraska? Mylena, I appreciate you. Fairbanks, Alaska. Okay, New York. Bettina, I appreciate that. I've been coughing. Hopefully, I still look okay. Fort Worth in the house. Salt Lake City. Dunlap, Tennessee. Atlanta. El Paso. Virginia. Ontario. Spring Lake, Michigan. Hadro, what's going on? Ooh. Ottawa, Akron, Austin. Okay, so we have a lot of people in tonight, and we have a very, very compelling topic. We're going to be talking about mental health, religious trauma, and so much more. And I have a very special guest today, Isami. I'll let her say her whole name. I do not want to mess it up, especially in a day when I'm having these vocal challenges. I don't know where this is coming from, but I'm going to bring her in. And I have not, normally when I go live, I like to talk to the guest. I like to talk to guests for a little bit, but I have not had a chance to really talk to her. So as you all are getting to know her, I'll begin to know her as well. Izumi, I'm so happy to have you on, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Isami Daehn, and it's definitely an honor to be here today and talking to you guys about religious trauma. I know this is going to be a heavy topic for so many people. When I first started sharing about this, I didn't realize how many people could relate to this subject. So, if at any point this, I'm sure these lives will be available for later as
Right.
well, the topics might be a little bit triggering. So, I just did want to give everyone a heads up for that. But thank you so much for having me here today.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. When you reached out, I was like, this is a very important topic. And, when people hear religious trauma, I think a lot of times people, based off of the DMs I get, people will say that they were former Christians or the church did this or that to them. And it's important to talk about it. And, I'm a Christian and, I talk about that a little bit online. But even though I'm a Christian, I still think we have to acknowledge, the people who say that they've left the church because of trauma, because everybody's feelings should be validated, whether we agree with it or not. So I'm so excited that I have an expert in this topic.
Thank you so much. And you're 100% right. I think people oftentimes don't share their story because they don't know if anyone would understand. Maybe they don't feel validated. I think a lot of times people think, oh, it was just religious trauma. I've heard that from people before where they categorize it and then they try to minimize what happened to them. And they think, oh, it was just religious trauma. It wasn't like so and so and this other story and that other story. And they minimize that trauma, and that's why they don't talk about it. But religious trauma can happen in other forms of religion as well, and not just Christianity. It can happen from all across the board. So I don't want anyone to feel left out as we're speaking about this. And I do identify as Christian as well. So if at any point I'm making references to the Christian faith, please know that I'm not trying to discredit what you've been through as well. I do understand there's just so much broader spectrum to what's happened within religious trauma as well.
Right, and thank you. Once again, when I talk about religion, I default to Christianity because that's where I am. But my page is a safe space for all individuals. So thank you for that was like a little subtle correction, but you're completely right.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. You're good because Christianity is not the only religion. But I'm saying sometimes I have blinders on of Christianity, but there's so many different religions, and it's such a deep and like multi-dimensional topic. So that's why I'm excited to get into it. And I'm so grateful that you chose to not only give your time but to be on this show. It means a lot to me.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Um,
Hmm.
I did want to share too, though, that I am a pastor's kid, and it's always the pastor's kid, right?
Right.
Um, and I also grew up in Japan as well, so I am half Japanese. I grew up in Japan until I was 17 years old and moved to the United States. I was raised in a very religious home. I also want to be very careful with the way I speak about that because what I understand about religion and Christianity now is 100% different than what I knew growing up. Growing up in my home, it was very, not just in the religious aspect of things, but it was very abusive physically. And unfortunately, I was also sexually abused by our church pianist as well. So there's a lot that
I'm
goes
proud to hear that.
with, yeah. Yeah, so unfortunately, there can be a lot of things that happen with religious abuse. For some people, it might have been a financial thing where they joined a cult and didn't realize it. And the next thing they know, their entire life savings is gone. They don't really have any money to take care of their family. Or maybe it's psychological, where they feel that if they don't offer a certain amount of time to this church, that their family is in danger of either physical health or what have you. So that's why they stay in these abusive environments. Maybe there's physical violence that happens as well. It can be a number of different things, but whatever you have experienced is definitely valid. Um, if it's okay, is it okay if I share a little bit of the backstory?
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, I was gonna ask you to
oh, okay.
like to tell us about yourself, but you started talking. Ooh,
I'm so sorry. I feel
oh
so
no, no,
bad.
no, it's my fault. I have some rice and chicken trauma because I can't even talk. But no, ooh, this is embarrassing, but it happens. And that's why I got my water here. Normally we
Yes.
do our water breaks late in the show, but I have to get water breaks throughout because something in my throat. But no,
Makes
I would
sense.
definitely love for you to be able to share a little bit about yourself. And
Yeah.
I think it's important to know your background so that as people are listening to you speak, they know that you have lived experiences too, and you're also talking from the perspective of an advocate. And you do this
Right.
on Instagram. So I'd love for people to know a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, of course. So as I mentioned before, I did grow up in Japan. Technically, our label was under missions. So we were considered a mission household. My dad was a pastor. There was abuse for as long as I can remember. Physical abuse was a very big thing in our home. But at the age of 15, my parents figured out a way to scam churches in the US into sending them money full time without them actually doing any of the work. So, yes, my parents did become professional scammers. So, I grew up in the church and then I watched this kind of progress into something completely different. When I was about 9 years old, we were part of a church. This was before they completely stopped doing mission work, but we were part of a church organization in Japan, and there was a church pianist that offered to teach myself and my two siblings piano for free. What I didn't really understand, and now looking back at it as an adult, I start to see that there's a lot of red flags with the relationship that this church pianist tried to create with myself. They started asking things like, how safe is your home? Does your dad ever get mad at you? Does he ever hit you? Things like that. This person was grooming me basically, and they were trying to understand how they could get themselves into my life. So when they knew that there were no other safe adults around, that's when they started to sexually abused me. So that happened from the time I was about 9 until I was almost 14 years old. I did tell my mother what was going on. Unfortunately, I have later realized that she was well aware of what was going on. Um, and my innocence was being exchanged for free piano lessons for myself, my siblings, and sometimes for groceries, which this was a really hard thing for me to kind of grasp later on as an adult. I'm learning now that that's actually a definition, one of the legal definitions of human trafficking. I know a lot of times we think human trafficking is just like somebody in a car or in a trunk and, help, help. But it's so very, very different for various different people. So again, when I say religious abuse, it can be tied into so many different things. It can be tied into physical, psychological, um, sexual abuse. It can be a whole number of things. It can even come in forms of racial trauma, racial abuse as well, segregation, things like that. I actually have a friend of mine who has a podcast who talks about this, and he is a pastor. So if anybody would like to check that out later, his name is Tyler Burns. You also might have seen Pastor Kevin Wilson on TikTok. He talks about this too as well, where he talks about colonized Christianity and how religion has been used to really hurt people. Within discrimination. So there's so many different facets to religious abuse. Um, so as I grew older and became an adult, and I started meeting people who claimed Christianity as their faith, I started to notice there was something very different with the way that I was raised and with what they were talking about. They weren't talking about things like hoping people would get sick if they didn't like them. That was one of the big things that I heard growing up in these churches, was that if you went against the man of God or the apostle or the prophet or the pastor, whoever it was in leadership, and you said anything, there was a chance that you would end up with a physical sickness. And so I was
Mm.
terrified my whole life of making one wrong mistake. Maybe God would punish me. Maybe I would end up with things. And this is actually something that was used to control me even in high school. I actually developed a severe eating disorder, which I understand now was kind of a way to cope with a lot of the trauma that I had experienced. But I was later told by various church people, including my parents, that this was brought on to myself due to my sin. So I had to suffer. I was not allowed to see a doctor for this. So I went to college very, very sick with this eating disorder. And so I did go to a religious college. There are some things that I'm not 100% in line with the school, if you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Um, However, I did meet so many wonderful people that started to change that narrative, to change my mind about maybe what I was taught is not okay. Maybe what I
Mm.
was taught is not in line with what I believe to be scripture.
Mhm.
Maybe that's not okay. Maybe abuse is not okay to use, especially
Right.
towards women. That was a big thing in the churches that I grew up in. A lot of times, scriptures or these holy passages were taken out of context to abuse women, abuse children, and it was all because they had to obey, to submit to this leadership, regardless of what was being done. There was no
Mm.
questions that should be asked. Another thing that was, there's no accountability in these types of environments. So no one is checking on you. No one is speaking up for you. So this was very common as well. So seeing that very vast difference between what I grew up with and what
Mhm.
a lot of my friends were explaining when they spoke about religion made the wheels start to turn. And it wasn't until I was 23 that I realized, I kind of had an aha moment,
Okay.
where I was thinking this whole time, like maybe if I'm good enough, and I think a lot of people have different references to who they believe God is. But in my case, I believe God being from the Bible for my life, and I would think, oh, maybe if I'm good enough, maybe if I do all these things to make God happy, maybe if God is no
Mhm.
longer angry at me, He'll love
Right.
me and I'll be good enough. And I had an aha moment where all of those burdens, the responsibilities, not even responsibilities, just all the pressure really that I
Right.
put on my whole life, that other people had put on me. I realized that it was not at all okay.
Mhm.
And I had some people call it a come to Jesus moment, but I had a
Right.
moment where I realized that it was no longer about me trying to please other people, even trying to please God as a being, at all. And realizing that it was okay to accept myself exactly who I was, where I was in that moment. And that really started to shape different things in my life.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, later down the road, it did end up in my parents disowning myself and my sister.
Wow.
Um,
Sorry to hear that
that
once again.
I'm sorry.
No, I said sorry to hear that once again.
Yes. So, and that's another thing that I've heard with so many people. I've met so many wonderful people, and it breaks my heart when I hear their stories. Being like, who would ever do this to you? Where I'll hear about whether it's youth from the LGBTQ plus communities, where they'll talk
Mhm.
about, I came out to my parents. The next thing I knew, my bags were on the curb, and I was 15, or
I've heard those
sometimes
stories
even,
too.
yeah, and sometimes even younger, and that breaks my heart so much because if you look at any religion, really, the basis of it, most of them anyway, is love. And you think, okay, how could you do this to someone? How could you excuse
Right.
abuse? How could you excuse, you know, depriving a child of basic needs, even education? Or in my case, this did happen, um, where if we would come to the US and travel and try to convince churches to take us on for sponsorship, my parents would actually make my siblings and I practice instruments for hours and hours and hours. If we didn't follow through with this, there was physical abuse. And during this time, and I was homeschooled my whole life, but during this time, we didn't touch any curriculums or textbooks. It was strictly
Wow.
dedicated to performing to make money. Um, and so there's so many people that go through this, and they're deprived of their basic needs in the name of religion, and it's a horrible thing, and it results in so much trauma. Um,
Wow.
but that's a little bit of the backstory and what I've come from. So
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I have so much to say. First of all, thank you for sharing your story.
yeah,
Number two, sorry that you went through, all of those things. And then number three, also thank you for being brave enough to be able to speak publicly about this because, I would imagine that people will be leaving comments, to the right side. And, I bring a couple on the screen every now and then, but people are leaving their comments and people are saying that they've had similar
yeah,
experiences or they're talking about people that they've known who have been through similar things. And the thing about Christianity, even as a Christian, or the thing about religion that I've learned, by being a Christian, is that it's something that's so all consuming. Like it's supposed to, to be like that, right? But it's so all encompassing that you can use it to kind of push any agenda that you want.
right,
And that's what I've seen. And when you don't, like even talking about the grooming part, right? Um, when you have people who, and this is something that I want to educate myself more on when it comes to grooming victims of abuse and trafficking and things like that. But when it comes to, someone who's in a position of authority and you have somebody who's vulnerable, a lot of times these people are repeat offenders. So they
yeah,
pick up on people who are more likely to be abused, right? So they're
yep,
gonna go certain type of like indicators that go off in their head. Like, oh, there's not anybody at home, or they're very religious. And if they know that you love God and you're a child, and you're like, okay, I want to love God, I want to go to heaven, and they use
yeah,
that to get you to do anything from the instruments to any type of abuse. That's an awful thing, and it's happening to many people around the world, and
yeah,
that's the scary thing about it. But on the flip side, that's a good thing about your story because like it took you 23 years before you had that light bulb moment. And if somebody can watch this, or maybe, somebody who's watching this says it to somebody who may be experiencing this, or know somebody who is kind of going through that phase where they realize that, okay, I'm in the same religion as somebody else, but my
right.
upbringing is a little bit different. I think it could really help to save lives. So I'm humbled that you would share your story.
Thank
And
you.
now that, and how old are you now, may I ask?
I'm 32.
32. Okay, yeah, I know it's scary to ask a woman her age. I'm like, can I ask her age?
It's fine.
Can I ask her age? Yeah.
Oh,
So
good.
now 9 years later, right? For people who because and you do a good job on Instagram of advocating for people
Thank
who
you.
may have gone through the same type of thing, but for somebody who just had an aha moment and they realize that they may have gone through this type of abuse, because sometimes you don't know that you've been abused until like you're out of it and the smoke
Yeah,
clears, and then you're like, oh my goodness, that's abuse, that's gaslighting, right? And then people watch certain videos online and like they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was my experience. What would you say to somebody who was just kind of like figuring this out and realizing that they may have gone through this traumatic situation?
yeah. I think, especially if you've come from a faith where abusers have taken the word forgiveness to manipulate people.
Mm,
And I think a lot of people have been told this. If you have heard that, then you've probably also heard that it's wrong to be angry, it's wrong to be anxious, and it's wrong to worry. A lot of these common emotions that we feel on a daily basis, you've probably been told you have to shut those down. What I would say to someone who's having that aha moment and realizing now that, hey, I was abused, I went through that, depending on, where you are and what's going on in your life. You may have children and you're starting to realize that, oh, I would never treat my child the way that I was treated even in my church. And maybe you had that moment. I've met people like that too. I would say to someone just to realize that it's okay to feel those emotions, and everything inside of you is probably going to say, don't be angry, it's wrong. But it is okay to be angry. It is okay to walk through each one of those
Mm-hmm.
emotions. You're going to feel sadness. You're going to feel betrayal. You're going to feel grief, all of those things, probably all at once, because I know I did. But it's okay to feel those things. And it's okay to even question, do I even believe this anymore? It's okay to
Mm.
have those questions and to be really gentle with yourself, to be kind to yourself as you go through this. And then also seek professional therapy or help or support group. There's so many wonderful ones out there. One of my favorites is Celebrate Recovery. They are national across the US. It is a Christian organization, so maybe you have come from that religious trauma through a church background. That's a great place to start. Their motto is for anyone with hurts, habits, and hangups, and that does include religious trauma. That's a place where I've found a lot of safety in being able to share my story with other people. And you'd be surprised how many people will come forward and say, yes, I was a pastor's kid, or yes, my parents were in youth leadership or ministry, or this youth pastor did this to me. All of these things start coming forward, and you start to find a community of people who can really help you and walk with you. Please don't do this alone. It's very isolating if you start to believe you're the only one. And I've been there too, because you were conditioned to believe that at one point. So remember that you're not alone as you're going through this, but it's okay to seek help, and it's definitely okay to even feel angry as to what happened to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And there's
Yeah,
something that you mentioned that I want to touch on. The part where you said it's okay to even question whether you believe this or not.
yeah.
Can you talk to me about that? Because I think for some people, questioning whether you believe the thing that you were raised to believe is somewhat traumatic. Even like allowing yourself to
Mhm.
get to the point where you're like, do I really believe this? Because it cuts deep into your identity. So can you
Right.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of times you might have been taught don't question things, and at least that way it was that way for me. I can't speak for everyone, but in my home, we were taught that you don't question, because if you do question, then you're a bad person, or you're a bad Christian if you question anything. So even if we read scripture and we thought, oh, what you're saying and what I'm reading here don't match, this doesn't make any sense, we would get in trouble. There was even a passage that my mom would use to condone abuse. I forget where it's in, but she would say things like, the righteous endure suffering. And so she would tell that to me
Mm, wow.
anytime my father would lose his temper. So he'd
Wow.
lose his
Wow.
temper, fists were thrown. There was a lot of physical abuse. I won't go into too much detail with that, but after that would happen, sometimes I would be in my room crying. And she would come in there and she would say things like, the righteous endure suffering. So this is just a way of God's testing, even if it was through my dad or through other people. And so it made me afraid to even question what I believed, because if I did, maybe God would send more pain my way and it would be all my fault. So if anyone is wondering if it's okay to question, maybe start at the small things. Maybe start at the things where you're like, this doesn't seem right. Let me check. Because maybe you still do identify as whatever religion that you grew up in. You might start to see that there's some things that don't align up with what your abuser was saying, and that may give you some peace. I know it gave me a lot of peace with that. There was another passage where it says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And I was very indecisive as a child, but I would get in trouble for it, to the point that there was physical abuse if I couldn't decide right away.
Sorry.
So it would make me very anxious when I was making decisions. And later on, much later on, as an adult, I was sitting in church and the pastor was preaching about it. And basically, he was saying that the subject was talking about how, if you are going to seek counsel from God, um, to not necessarily doubt what you're asking for. So
Hmm.
believe in faith.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what the passage is speaking
Yeah.
about. And I had another light bulb moment where I thought, it is not about me being an anxious person or
Right.
indecisive at all. I'm not
Hmm.
a bad person for weighing out all my options before I dive head first
Right.
and making a decision. I thought, "Oh, wow." And so that was a very healing moment for
Hmm.
me where I realized that, the words used to abuse me were completely taken and and I like what you said earlier, how anything can be used in two different ways.
Twist
Yeah.
it up and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about Disney, for example. So
Hmm.
you have stories like Alice in Wonderland or The Little Mermaid. The original stories were quite gruesome, but now they're
Yeah.
in a very cute fairy
Right.
tale sort of way. So they're the same story, but two very different
Hmm.
things. Not saying the Bible is similar to a
Right.
Disney movie, but it could be something like that where you realize, oh, as I study this on my own, I get to make a decision whether or not this is something that I'm going to accept for
Right.
myself and possibly even reject what my abusers have said because this does not match at all what I was taught before.
Right.
So that may be a place to start for someone.
That's good. And I'm a little curious. So you went through all of this, trauma in your childhood, right? And you didn't have the light bulb moment until 23,
Hmm.
and you still decided to continue to be a Christian. Can you talk to me about your decision to remain, as a believer? And were there any, if you're comfortable sharing, were any moments where you were contemplating leaving the church, for your mental health or anything like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think the reason that I stayed, and this is something that I definitely want to kind of tell everyone out there that I don't identify as Christian prior to the age of 23. I was very religious. I even started to notice myself becoming like my parents, where I would judge other people. Maybe they weren't dressed up to standard for myself if they were at church, and I would think, oh, they must not love God. And I started to notice
Mm.
these behaviors even in myself
Wow,
because
wow.
a lot of times we do become like the people who raised us. Um, Even if it is unintentional. And so I think there's a lot of things that evolved, if that's a good word to use, within the
Yeah.
faith. Before 23 is definitely a night and day difference
Hmm.
to the way I approach things, even the way I approach studying. Before then, I didn't even study the Bible. I just thought, oh, these people are telling me what to believe, and this must be just the truth. But after that moment, I realized I needed to study this for myself. I needed to
Got
understand
it.
the why behind everything. I will say, even as, and some people use this term baby Christian or
Mhm.
young Christian.
Yeah, I've
You
heard
probably heard
that.
that term before.
Yeah.
Even as a young Christian at 23, there were still a lot of mindsets that I was kind of stuck in. Now, the church I was in was a pretty healthy church, but there were some things that I don't quite align up with now, and they're more personal preferences. um, and then even after, as I got older, even after that experience, I ended up in a church that had some abusive qualities. And that's when I realized, okay, even though I am a Christian, I need to understand that everyone needs to be held accountable, even within religious organizations. So, me presently, I no longer attend a church unless they do background checks for anyone who works with youth or anything like that. There has to be an accountability process. Um,
Wow.
and
Wow.
the church that I attend now, my husband's actually on the security team, and
Mhm.
they're trained. They have to be background checked. There are cameras in the nursery.
Wow.
You cannot pick up your child unless you have a number that matches the sticker
Yeah.
that's on the kid's back,
I
because they
like
want to
that.
keep, yeah, because they got to keep kids safe. And
I love
so,
that.
yeah, and as a survivor, that means so much to me. So it's not necessarily that, I stopped believing the same things. It's just that
Right.
there's a different approach
Right.
to what I believe now. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
just talking about the safety aspect of things. And this is something that I don't have any kids, but I think about it like, oh, should I have kids one day? It's a cold world. It's
Yes.
not everybody in the world has good intentions, and that's okay. Like not everybody is gonna mean well to us and our families. But I like the fact that like you have a system that's like, in place to protect children. Because I think, like, obviously, like, the government, schools, and laws should protect children, but also as parents, right? And even as uncles and aunties, like, anytime you have a child that's in your care, whatever thing you can do in addition to help protect kids is,
Yeah.
I never knew that, like, it's so well thought out. I really like that. I really like that.
Yeah, it's so
Awesome.
important. And I think that's why a lot of times people are a little hesitant to go to church too, and I understand that. And I've heard this from various people where they say, I am a Christian, or I
Mhm.
do identify as this religion, but I'm afraid to go back to a place of worship because maybe the same
Mhm.
things that happened to me will happen there to my
Right.
kids. And that's a valid fear,
Yeah.
that happened to you. And so that's
Mhm.
why I think it's so. And again, I don't have kids either, but I
Yeah.
have a nephew. And and this is going to sound very strange, maybe, but my nephew's 10,
Hmm.
and until my nephew was born, I actually believed that all households were abusive. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
just because of the trauma, I believe that. And so
Wow.
watching the way my sister has raised my nephew
Mhm.
has really given me hope and peace. Just knowing that there are safe families. And the way there are safe families, there are safe churches out there too. So,
Right.
even if you don't feel comfortable going back to church and you want to, give yourself some time. It's okay. Thankfully, there's so many online streaming places too, where you can check things out first and you can kind of
Right.
like read online and see,
Very true.
okay, are these reputable people before you start attending a place? So those are definitely out there too as well. Yeah.
That's fantastic. You shared so much. I do have one more question. So you
Yeah.
said you were married. Now, in terms of like the childhood trauma that you picked up, the religious trauma, how do you think that affected you as you approached relationships?
Oh, wow. I will say our marriage when we first got married is completely different than the marriage I have now. When I first got married, I don't think I even trusted my husband. He never gave me a reason to not trust him.
Right.
And we'll be married 10 years this July. But we,
Congrats.
thank you so much. Yeah. But we've both experienced a lot of that religious trauma. And I think that's why we understood each other so much. But it definitely affected our relationship. Going into the marriage, he never treated me this way. I just want to make that very clear. But going into the marriage, I had this idea of what a wife was supposed to look like. I wasn't allowed to have an opinion. I wasn't allowed to speak my mind or have concerns. And he's really invited me into that space to open up and to be more confident in myself. So that's been a really huge thing there. And also, we both didn't know what healthy relationships look like just from the examples that we were given. So we were taught, this is a biblical marriage where the wife doesn't speak, the husband overshadows her, those types of things. And he didn't want to be anything like that either. So as we've kind of both developed our faith, and he went through a similar experience too, where he had kind of a light bulb moment. But as we've both developed our faith, we've realized that there are so many things that people in power use. And it's so sad because I've even seen this on Instagram where it's like, I don't want to name names and I'm not going to, but there are some religious people who will even go on social media to um, spout things that are just very condescending towards various genders or misogynistic things. And this is the example that you see, but we both realized that we did not want that. And as we've both studied our faith together, we've been able to grow together and we've been able to understand that the examples that we were given are not at all okay, and that we as adults have to study this on our own and make decisions for ourselves. So it's really strengthened our relationship throughout all this process.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And
Yeah.
there was one thing that you touched on at the end there, and I'm curious. You mentioned, like, on Instagram or on social media,
Yeah.
religious people, or actually anybody who has influence can put things in certain ways, and you're in a position to where you can manipulate. And I
Yeah.
think about that sometimes with myself. Whenever I'm making this skits, I'm like, oh, let me make sure that I can like back this up with evidence, and then make it funny, but at least make sure
Right.
it's
Yeah.
rooted in some sort of like objective, like okay, this is like actual evidence-based information, right? But when you have a lot of followers online, what are you? I'm just curious because I have opinions on this. I don't speak about it too much because I see things and I'm like, I just look at it. I'm like, all right, and I'll scroll. But when it comes to like religious leaders
Mhm.
online, and the things that they put online or the things that they say, uh, I mean, my face is giving away how I feel about certain things. But I gotta pick my words carefully. But
Yeah.
what's your perspective on that? I think you get what I'm saying,
Yes.
right?
So by day, I am a social media strategist. So I work with a lot of marketing people. A lot of times, what you see online is completely 100% a marketing gimmick. There are people that will use religion in order to push a certain narrative. Maybe it's a financial contribution or other things in order to control, manipulate, and coerce people into doing that. That is also religious abuse. But I do see that a lot. Yeah, it definitely
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, and it's tough because like I see it, I share things amongst family members and friends or just ask for opinions, but it's not more so to be like, oh, if you're a Christian, just oh, leave Christianity or leave Islam or leave
Mhm.
whatever religion that you're part of. But it's more so I think to make people like you said, you studied the word for yourself, so you could redefine what that relationship with God meant for you, as opposed
Right.
to going by what somebody told you in order to manipulate you as a child. So I think just for the people at home, like this kind of, you know, I say fact check everybody, including my
Right. Yeah.
content. Maybe my stuff is off or something like that. And if somebody, sends me a video and I happen to catch the DM, I'm like, all right, okay, well, that was wrong. Let me revise it. Or if it's
Yeah.
factually incorrect, then I'm stripping the video down ASAP. But I think, like you said, the accountability. We all have to be accountable to
Yeah.
something. And you see it's not just in the church, right? You see it everywhere. But when you have somebody in the church who doesn't have to answer to anybody, I think that's a very
Mhm.
dangerous place to be.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, it's great that you mentioned that. We just talked about that at the church that I attend this weekend, or this past weekend. So we have a process every couple years where we select people in leadership to be accountability partners to the pastor. So these are
Oh, okay,
people that
wow.
have the ability to call the pastor out and say, "Hey, your behavior is not okay. Maybe you need to step back for a little bit. Maybe you need to talk
Mm,
this out with someone." So there's a whole council of people that work with our pastor and the leadership team. And so what really, and I just moved to Las Vegas recently, so
okay.
this is kind of a new church for us, but this really made me feel very appreciative of what they were doing, because what they've chosen to do is the new people that they've brought on for this council team. They're putting them on a 2-week probation. So they put their names up on the screen. They even put a contact email address up there. And they said, if there is any reason, and we've done full background checks, we've done studies on these people, like we've had references, but if there's anyone in this congregation that does not think that these two people should be in council, and then they gave, and not just because, oh, I don't like them, but for some actual scriptural reason, and they gave the reference why they shouldn't be up there, or if they're unsafe people, please email us. We will take them off the board immediately. So that type of accountability has to happen. It doesn't matter how big or small the church is, because without accountability, there will always be abuse.
Yeah, I agree. And somebody asked a question. Emlyn says it's so hard to find a church that we would like it to genuinely be. How can we decide to trust the church? So, Isami touched a lot on this, and she said accountability, and you talked about the things that were put in place to help the kids out, keep kids safe. But
Yeah.
if you were talking to Emlyn like one on one, and she just found a church and she liked it, but she's not sure whether she can really trust it, right? For her and her, spouse and her kids.
Yeah.
What would you say to her?
I would say ask questions, depending on the size of the church, they may have like a greeting staff where people will be at like a table or hosting after the service to answer any questions you might have. If it's a smaller church, you may be able to ask to have coffee with a pastor in your family. That might be an option for you. It just depends on what's available, but don't be afraid to ask questions. A church that's not transparent is probably not somewhere you want to be. Because most likely if they're not being upfront with you, and I understand people have schedules, so I'm not saying if the pastor can't come to your house tomorrow, that they're bad people, but what I'm saying is if there is no one available to answer your questions, it's probably not the right place, because they're going to try to do their best to answer those questions that you have or any concerns even.
Yeah, I like that. And just to add on to that, the vulnerability, like the transparency of a church. Because I think back to my old church in Georgia, which is probably when I was the most involved in church. It felt transparent, like you could ask anything. And as you were answering the question, I was trying to think about a way that I would talk to her and answer it one on one. And it's the transparency, because like the only thing I had was I was like, when I went to that church in Georgia, I was like, the vibes felt good, right? But you can't go off of vibes. But
No.
what I meant was that like I felt like if I asked a question, that it wouldn't be put to the side. And shout out to my Pastor Mark Etchell. He's in California now, and Pastor Gabriel Johnson. Uh, and I could just text him, like literally, like I could text him any question, like, hey,
Yeah.
um, I I like this girl. I don't know about her. Will you
Yeah.
have lunch with us? Something like that. Like he
Yeah.
would pick up, or I'd say, hey, Pastor Mark, what's a good way to invest this money? And he would, give examples from his life. And I felt like I was talking to a human being, and not just
Mhm.
like the pastor or some
Oh.
big, like it was like
Yeah.
a conversation. Like you wouldn't know that this person is an associate pastor, because we're just like we're vibing, right? Vibes.
Yeah.
But when it comes to picking a church and you have kids involved, and you're leaving your kids unsupervised, it's not just vibes, right? You have to like
Mm-mm.
really dig deep. And
Yeah.
I mean, if I had kids, I'd be so much more like anal and slightly paranoid,
Mhm.
because I work in mental health and I've seen so much.
Right.
So I'm sure that's going to
Oh,
impact how I'm as a parent. But yeah, I like what you said. You really have to have that system in place to where you can, like, you should be accountable, and so should the head honcho of the church, the boss. Everybody should be accountable.
yeah,
Yeah, I
definitely.
love that. Thank you so much. So,
Thank
where
you.
can people find you online?
Yeah, I'm mostly living on Instagram these days, but my handle is at mental health Isami, and Isami is spelled Isami. Or you can check out my website, which is Isami Daehn, DAEHN.com. We are also doing over there a survivor story series. So if at any point you would like to share your story anonymously, just send me a DM with the title My Story and then type out your story. What we do is I crop out the message that you send. So your name is removed. Your photo is removed, and that goes into an Instagram story highlight. You'll also see that there are quite a few people who have already shared on there, so you might even be able to find some people. Of course, their names are not revealed, so you won't know who they are, but you might find some stories that you can relate with. Um, and it's just been a really great space for community.
I love that. And before I let you go, we have to do a water break, because
Okay.
are you familiar with the water break?
No, or me.
Okay. Well, so I do this thing where we have like a water break where we just drink water. We just drink water. So I need those who are OG followers to go ahead and to type the special buzzword in the chat so we can drink this water. Until somebody types it in, we can't drink the water. So hopefully
Oh no.
somebody is
Hopefully, because like my throat
watching. Yeah. And
needs
plus
water.
I could use the water tonight. So I'm waiting for somebody to drop that special buzzword in, and then we can go go ahead and get this water break. But that's not the buzzword, Jess.
No.
There's a buzzword, water break. Meg, you're close. You're close.
There's
There
emojis.
we go. Cheers. Megan Walker's at it.
Hey,
All right.
cheers.
Cheers, y'all.
Do
Water
you do
break.
you want to know how to say cheers in Japanese?
Yeah, how you say it?
Kanpai.
Come by.
Yeah, kanpai.
Come by. Cheers.
Yes.
Cheers. Cheers. A water break. So thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate your time. And so we IsamiDaehn.com. I put the website in there, and the Instagram is can you drop that one more time?
Sure, it's Mental Health Isami.
Look at me struggling to spell mental
Ah!
health.
I do want to clarify one thing before we go today. I am
Yes,
not
ma'am.
a licensed therapist. So, again, I'm more than willing to share your story. Just title it My Story and Share. But if you are in need of seeking a professional licensed therapist, please know that I'm not a licensed therapist. So I can't give you any clinical advice. But yeah, I'd love to connect with you online.
Yeah, I'm happy you said that. So once again, thank you so much for being on. I'll send the book your way, so just hang on after
Oh,
the
thank you.
broadcast. I'll send the book your way. But thank you so much, and everybody who's been watching, thank you for your attention. And the people in the comment section, you all were very respectful. I know everybody comes from different backgrounds and different religions and lifestyles, but y'all were fantastic. Y'all were very respectful. So thank you so much. And Isami, thank you. I appreciate you for coming on to the show.
Thank you.
All right, y'all have a good night.